Blessed love, my Lord and Empress. Give thanks and praise for life, health, and strength. Thanks for mighty life giver, Most High, Selassie Jah, Rastafari. This is the African Liberation Network. I'm the host, Honorable Prophet Daniel. And, today we're doing something a little bit different. The study group has been working on this topic of neocolonialism, which, we're breaking it down into the 9 areas of human activity as, laid out by a man named Neely Fuller Jr., who is someone whose work I've studied. He wrote a book about racism, white supremacy, and he broke down human activity into 9 areas: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. So we were just looking at how neocolonialism affects all of those different areas. And it's too much to squeeze into one program because it's such a complex subject. And it's a very important subject for, I would say, everybody really to understand. But, the African Liberation Network, really, we are focused on liberating the African, Black people in general. So our perspective, of course, is going to be for the enlightenment and the education of Black people specifically. But it will also apply to other nations as well, other people, other races, if you will. So today I'm just going to give an overview of what neocolonialism is, a brief definition and kind of an explanation of what it is before we really get into the very specific, minute details. And so over the next, days, possibly weeks, probably weeks, but for the next few days, we'll be going into the economics aspect of it. Myself as the host, but also I'll be having, some of the other study group members to have one-on-one reasoning. Sometimes maybe 1 or 2 will be present with me, so we can spend a little bit more time, because usually the Sunday program, if we have, say, 10 people on and everybody wants to speak, the time is limited, and therefore everybody can't really go into as much detail as they may want to, because we try to keep everybody speaking down to a minimum, just so everybody doesn't have to wait so long to be able to speak. And sometimes when you're speaking, it can be like redundant. You start saying the same things over and kind of getting off topic and stuff like that. So we're going to focus more, for this particular subject, to really explain it to the world of Black people, how this new system affects our lives. But before we get into that, I wanted to take a moment to kind of, give our viewers a little bit of an explanation of what our purpose is as the African Liberation Network, which I haven't done as yet. And this, what I say, will probably develop over time. But for now, this is, the concept is, look at the words, African Liberation Network. African to me is anybody who's Black, and when I say Black, I'm not being specific of like dark skin color, because in countries where it's all Black people mostly, they'll break it down and say, there's black and brown and yellow and clear and all of these different things. But I'm using Marcus Garvey's definition of Black. He would have said Negro in his time because that was the word that was used. But we say Black, and African also is, to me, they're synonymous. They're the same thing. To be Black is to be African, and to be African is to be Black. Now, you have Black people in countries like Australia and India, but, if you know the origin of humans, then you know the first people were Black people, you know, in the continent of Africa, you know, billions of years back. Not hundreds, not thousands, not millions, but billions, you know, of years that they found so far, which, you know, there could be even, you know, people that existed before billions. It could be trillions or, you know, but to our knowledge, you know, the oldest humans that have been found in Africa, and they date their bones back billions of years, you know, not 1 billion, but more than 1 billion, you know, and that's a lot. But anyway, so the darker skinned people of other continents and the Indian subcontinent, they're still, you know, African, you know, they just have been living in other countries, other areas for some time and have, you know, been identified differently, like Aboriginal and, you know, stuff like that. And I personally, when I say we, I mean the African Liberation Network, don't really get into the division aspect of it, because if you really look at how the system of racism works, which also is known as white supremacy, the way it works is that anybody who's not white is treated, who they're white is at the top according to their system, and everybody who's not white is somewhere under them. And the lighter the skin color, the more privilege is available, and the darker the skin color, the less privilege. You know, sayings like if you're white, you're all right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're brown, stick around. And if you're Black, stay in the back. Those kind of that right there is an expression of racism. But according to Marcus Garvey, anybody who would have qualified as a Negro, that means you have some African, some Black in you. You could have a Black grandfather, but if you look like, and say you got a Black grandfather and your grandmother was white and your parents may be light skinned or white, but you still have like curly hair and African kind of features. In a society like America, where you have mixed races, you have white and Black and all other, you know, a lot of different other nations. Like my grandmother, for instance, my dad's mother, was very light skinned and kind of straighter hair. She still was identified as Black in America. You know, back in the days, it was like if you had like 1/16 of African blood, you were considered Black. You know, so I don't break it down too much and say you're Black and you're brown and you're clear and all that stuff, because it doesn't really serve us. You know, and so anyone who could have been a member of the UNIA, to me, is a Black person. And that's going to range from very light skin, you know, with different features, all the way to the blackest Black, you know, blue Black. So everybody that fits into that, you know, is who the African Liberation Network is designed to liberate. Okay, so the next word, liberation. Liberation means to free, to free something or someone, to liberate. Now, there's levels to liberation, right? Because you could be physically captive, but mentally free, spiritually free, and you can be physically free, but spiritually and mentally in bondage, which a lot of our people are today. You know, we don't have shackles and chains on our hands and feet and necks, and things like that. We can move as we want to. I can go to the store. I can travel to another country. Some of us, you know, that's more limited than others, depending on what country you come from, if you have felonies, those type of things. But generally, if you're not in prison, you're considered to be a free person. But if your religion, you know, is that of the white supremacists, you know, like if you're Black and you pray to a white deity, if you close your eye and pray, or if you go to church and you look up and you see stained glass with a white Jesus there, then you're spiritually captive. You know, you still haven't freed yourself from, you know, the chains that they put on your ancestors' minds and the religion that was forced upon them. So we're here to do all of the above. We want African people to be totally free. Freedom, redemption, and repatriation is the slogan of the Bobo Shanti Order, which I'm a member of. And, that's what we're here to do for Black people. And network, a network is a coordinated or organized group of people, organizations, businesses, etc., that work together. Networks are beneficial because there's only so much any one can do or any one organization. So it's good to network with others to be able to have like specific tasks done by individuals and organizations, businesses that are more skilled in one area. Like your body, your goody, it has organs, and no organ does the same thing as another organ, but they all work together to make us function as humans. So a network is similar to a human goody, we have programs like the study group, which is elders, is young people, is man and woman, not any children really, because the topics that we go into are kind of they're complex, and children could learn, but they couldn't really probably contribute very much yet. The music class, we have diverse group of people, and we will have more programs in the future. We've done interviews in the past. We'll do more interviews, etc. Who knows what the future will bring, but the main purpose of all that we do is to enlighten Black people about who they are and their current situations that we're living in, the world, and how to navigate within it to be free. So yeah, that's the definition, if you will, of the African Liberation Network. And, I'm the host. I organize a lot of the programs, but I wouldn't say that my job or my position is any greater than any one of the individuals or entities that we work with. I'm just doing a part, and, all of the parts have to come together. That's what organization is all about. And that's one of my strengths, is to be able to organize using, technology and, things like that, networking, et cetera, to bring it all together. So that's our purpose, and that's our, methodology. And, neocolonialism is really what we need to be liberated from in this time, so that's why I feel, and that's why I think and know that this particular topic of neocolonialism is so very important for the African to understand, because if you don't understand it, just like if you don't understand racism, the world as you see it will be confusing. You might not feel confused, but your actions will show that you are confused. Some of the things that Black people do in the world today, as a result of colonialism and then neocolonialism as the follow-up, really show that we are confused people, because a lot of what we do as people doesn't make sense. It may make sense to us in our small world sometime, but when others look at us, it's kind of like, they're like, it doesn't make any sense why. I don't want to go into too much detail because we're going to touch on the details, but just to, inform those who are watching what it is that we set out to do. So, without further ado, I'll give now a definition and overview of what neocolonialism is. All right, so neocolonialism is the follow-up of colonialism. Rastafari is an anti-colonial movement that started back in the early 1900s. It became known as Rastafari after the crowning of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I in 1930. But there were other elements that led up to it, such as the UNIA, and, other, Black movements that identify with Ethiopia and Zion and these type of things. So Rastafari was a follow-up. And when you tie in the movement aspect of it to, with the say spiritual or religious aspects, it became a full, livity, as we call it today. But it's geared towards, countering neocolonialism and colonialism. So colonialism was when, European countries, they set out around the whole world, and they saw non-white people in every other country, every other area in the world. They realized that they were outnumbered. Nobody else was white anywhere else they went. And so they decided amongst themselves, separately, when I say separately, nations, the like Spanish and the French weren't working together necessarily, but they had the same objective, which was to make the rest of the non-white world their subjects and to expand their empires, which, that's what imperialism is. It's similar to colonialism, but they're not the same exactly. An empire is not just like a government. It has an emperor, so imperialism, colonialism is when these European countries set out around the world to exploit the rest of the world. They created borders that didn't exist before. They named countries, they were able to, do the transatlantic, what they call the transatlantic slave trade. I don't really like to call it that because it's not slaves they were trading, it's people, it's our ancestors, But they moved people from one place in the world to another place, subjugated them, exploited them, etc. We know, the whole spiel of how that went. Now, coming into the 1900s, the 20th century, in the mid 20th century is when countries that were colonies started to gain their independence on a mass scale. Like African countries in the mid 1900s began to free themselves from the, colonial governments. And India and China, the bigger Asian countries, and all of them really, because everywhere was colonized. They started to free themselves and to have independence, quote unquote, and have their own, flags and, create their own idea of like patriotism to their nation, etc. Right. So this is right around the time that the Rastafari movement was becoming recognized, really. It started out with they didn't have dreadlocks, and over time it developed, and this isn't what this reasoning is really about, but I'm just trying to give a world view of the time period. The world of non-white people was freeing themselves from slavery and colonialism, etc. Now, the Europeans during colonialism were able to build wealth for their own countries from the human and natural resources that they were able to exploit from these other countries. And, so before they set out to do this, Europe wasn't rich like that. Nowadays we see European countries like France and Germany and the UK, they're like some of the most developed countries and some of the most influential countries in the world. And, countries where non-white people live, some of them are emerging nowadays, like China is big and India is big in technology. China is more so in like manufacturing and things like that. But they're creating a place for themselves in the world where they're not, on the bottom. But the darker skinned people of the world, countries where African people are the majority, are still very much subject to poverty and still, being exploited. So when they built their wealth from exploiting African countries, to the point where everybody who lives in a poor country wants to move to America, they want to move to Canada, they want to move to the UK, they want to move to the Netherlands, white countries, pretty much, countries where white people are the majority. They built their wealth and they established their countries and built infrastructure. So now they are how they are, as I just described. Neocolonialism is like the follow-up of that, because these European countries know that their wealth comes from outside of themselves. They have to be able to exploit Africa and all of the other countries where non-white people live in order for them to maintain their economic supremacy. And, there's other aspects like, religion. They spread Christianity around the world and painted Jesus as a white person and, made the world worship, not because people accepted it. They actually forced people to accept their religion, and, hence the mental chains that people got during colonialism. So now they realize that these countries are freeing themselves, and we still need our wealth because, we have to be able to maintain the things that we stole from them. Because if, all of a sudden now they are independent and we can't, when I say we, Europeans cannot continue to, maintain their infrastructure and keep pouring money into their educational institutions and financial institutions, et cetera, then their whole thing that they built up over all those hundreds of years would crumble. So they knew that amongst themselves, and, they didn't want to let that go, which, that makes sense. It's not right, it's not good, but it makes sense. So they came up with a cunning, clever way of continuing to be able to exploit the people, darker skinned people, the non-white people of the world. And so that is what we have today, which is called neocolonialism. Neo meaning new, colonialism, which I just described. So the new form of colonialism has, I'm gonna put a picture up. Neocolonialism. Back in the day, the master was white, the slaves were black, or brown or yellow, or whatever the case may be, the subjects, if you will, because not all of them were slaves. But the master was white, the subject was black or dark skinned, not white. And now the master is still white, but they put in, these puppet governments as, their ways to continue to exploit people, exploit countries, exploit governments, to keep them poor, and keep the West on top. When I say the West, Western Europe, white people in general, and not so much all of the Western Hemisphere, but America specifically. These countries according to their system, these countries have to remain in a position of power, and the subject countries have to always be readily exploitable. Otherwise, their world collapses. I've seen an image where, it's white people, rich, wealthy white people sitting around a table, and under that table is black slaves with shackles and chains. And basically it says, if we just stand up, then their whole thing is overturned and collapses. I'm paraphrasing. Of course, it was much more simply said than what I said, but that's the concept. So, nowadays we have, black faces in our governments, but they're still doing the bidding of the Europeans. They're still selling out their people and keeping their people in a position where they are an easily exploitable resource, right? So when the African countries, now we're focusing specifically on Black people and our how neocolonialism has affected us. When colonialism ended, when these African countries gained independence, and when the countries in the Caribbean gained their independence, anywhere where there was majority Black were gaining their freedom from the colonial powers. They there were it was a sense of radical opposition to white control of African people. And so, you had leaders like Patrice Lumumba, you had people like Idi Amin Dada, you had people like Thomas Sankara rise up, and these are just a few. They rose up. What they stood for was, very much anti-colonial. They wanted the whites out of their countries. They wanted to have control over their countries and their resources, to empower themselves, to be able to rise to a standard that the rest of the world was already at. Well, I shouldn't say the rest of the world, but the European world definitely was. So people like that, people like Patrice Lumumba and Idi Amin and Thomas Sankara were not conducive to the Western world maintaining their control over Black people and over Africa, and even in the Caribbean, you had leaders like Maurice Bishop in Grenada, who also, all of these people were assassinated except for Idi Amin Dada, but they do character assassination as well, and up to this day, they still assassinate any Black leader or any African leader that has the best interests of African people at heart and who is willing to make moves to empower African people and to empower Africa and African countries and governments to control their own destiny and to control their own resources, and do what they want to do with themselves, like how Europeans are able to, they project themselves to wherever they want to go. They do all kinds of things, and they don't have to ask anybody or get permission from anybody. They just do it. And, if they have to apologize, it's afterwards, African leaders who had the same intentions were assassinated. They were killed, they were taken out because it would have, crippled the white world, the Western world, the evil world. Movements like the Rastafari had already sprung up, but they became more fortified during this time period when they saw Zimbabwe gain independence. Bob Marley had the album called Africa Unite, and Zimbabwe was one of the songs on that album. And so that whole time period was just really a radical opposition for Black people. It was a radical opposition to white control and white domination. And the Europeans saw this, and I'm sure it shook them to their core. So they had to make examples. They killed Patrice Lumumba. The American government did that, the CIA. They killed Thomas Sankara. They used a Black man to kill him. He just recently was found guilty and is, going to be punished. He apologized to, Patrice Lumumba's family. But, he was used. I hate his actions, but he's still an African, and I know that he was probably in a position where he didn't have much option. If he, they make these things sound like a deal for African people. If you kill him, then we'll make you the president, and we'll, give you this much money and this much aid for your people, and etc. And you have people like Mobutu, who, gained a lot of personal wealth for him and himself and his family members, his friends, those who were willing to, comply with Western countries exploiting their people and their people suffering and the country being war-torn, etc. These Black so-called leaders, which, we still have them today, they were willing to go along with the program. People like Patrice Lumumba were not willing to go along with the program, so they had to be taken out. So, the Black Panthers is another example of, a group of Black people who had enough and wanted different. And they were infiltrated and eventually pretty much snubbed out. The Black Panthers still exist, but they're nothing like they were in the 60s and 70s, So the neo-colonialists now is in disguise. They rule behind the curtain. You can't see them. You can't point to the master anymore. You used to be able to in the days of slavery. There was a big house on the plantation. You knew the master and his family lived there. He was white. The slaves were Black. There was a racial, there was a, hierarchy within Black, like I said, light skin and the different color differentiation was the strata of the plantation life. Nowadays, it's not so simple. You can't really point to who is controlling it, who's making most of the money, because they make it seem like it's an equal opportunity world and anybody can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and become wealthy. And, countries like, in the Caribbean and Africa have Black faces as their government leaders, but the political agendas that they are operating in is not beneficial to Black people. It's more beneficial to the white world. And that's how they trick us, so they have us mad at, the Black president, thinking that he's the one who's doing this, but really they're behind the scenes pulling his strings and giving him, basically no good options. And he has to choose between the lesser of however many evils that he has to choose between. And so it really is another strategy to keep Black people divided, because we will hate our own governments, right? They have Black faces, so we can't say it's the white man. And, you have political division, like how in Jamaica, for instance, you have the PLP and JLP, PNP and JLP, I think I said that. They put the people against each other and people kill each other and do all kind of things like, they cooperate with like whoever they're loyal to. In America, you have, a different scheme, but the same objective. Right now in Georgia, they have two Black people running against each other. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican. And really, neither of them will actually serve Black people well. Barack Obama was a Black face for the American government, but he did more for, other communities who I don't have to name. You can look it up for yourself if you really want to know. But he definitely did more for other communities specifically than he did for the Black community. And he's supposedly Black. His wife is Black. His children are Black. So that's another tactic, to make you think that everything is equal and you can be whatever you want to be, and there's no oppression anymore, and etc. They make it seem like it's up to you, it's on you. If you want to make the best of yourself, you can. Some cases that's true, but a lot of cases is really not true. All right. Not to belabor the topic, but I'm just trying to be as in detail as possible, because it's a really tricky thing, and it's intentionally that way, so you cannot point out who it is to rebel against them, right? So the purpose of neocolonialism is for those colonial countries, and we'll stick with that. The colonial countries to be able to continuously exploit their former colonies, right? Some countries like India and China are making a place for themselves in the world. They're able to, they whatever industry it is that they're into, they're able to, not monopolize, capitalize off of it. And so when they get some money, whether it be corporations or the country itself, they can go into places like Africa, who are less developed than them, and create deals like where they're building, say, infrastructure, all through the Caribbean. I hear people tell me that the Chinese are building this, they're making roads, they have businesses, etc. But we are aware that they don't do these things with African people in their best interest. It's all about their nationality and establishing things for their posterity. And when they make a deal with you, this goes across the board. When the bigger country makes a deal with a less developed country, just know that the bigger country is going to be benefiting probably even more than the less developed country. But the less developed country has very little options. They need aid, they need assistance because they don't have the tools, they don't have the capacity to develop themselves without assistance from a more developed country. And so it's predatory, predatory lending and things. That's what they do. They use transnational corporations and multilateral institutions and treaties, which, transnational just means it's more than one nation involved. Like a multinational corporation means it's something like McDonald's, where they'll have corporate offices in more than one country. And so they're able to, like, say, if you have a company that makes textiles and you have an office in China, America's labor laws are much stricter than China, a place like China or Taiwan, where if the country in America, their office here has to abide by the rules that America has, the standards that America has for their employees. So sweatshops is really out of the question. But if you have an office in China, but it's still under the same name, it could be, ABC Textile Company. They don't have their stuff made in America. They have it made in China. They have an office in China. And so the office in China doesn't have to abide by the rules of America. They have to abide by the rules that are made in China. So they can have a sweatshop, which means they're capitalists. They can get their products made for a much cheaper price and sell them for a high price in America, like, Jordans and things like this. They're made for like dollars, in like not tens of dollars, but like ones, $3, $5, $7 to make the shoes. And then they come here and sell them for, over $100, sometimes hundreds of dollars, probably even thousands of dollars. Nowadays, I'm seeing some, crazy prices on shoes and stuff where I'm like, there's no shoe that looks that good, But, people here value that type of stuff, so they're willing to pay the high price. So these companies are making really ridiculous profits because of their multinational setup. And that is, a product and a tool of neocolonialism. It shouldn't be legal, It should be a standard labor laws across the world. No child labor should be accepted, but it happens in India and China and all of them, them countries over there, like what they call Asia. They have, and even in Africa, they have child labor, and it's tolerated because they're in a desperate situation. For the most part, the people who are doing that are not wealthy people. They're people who don't have much option. And that's the point. These countries, these corporations, these multinational, transnational corporations, these people have no options. So any little crumb that you're willing to give them, they will take it because there's no other choice. If they don't do that, they're not working. Like, I saw something in the news about this company called Shein, which is an online company based out of China that makes clothes really inexpensive, like design and clothes for low cost. And the controversy was that, they were overworking people, making them work 18-hour days and things like that. And whereas in this video, and you have American people saying, well, at least they have employment. If it wasn't for Shein, they might not be working. That's a capitalist mind. Instead of being compassionate and thinking, that's not right, it's not fair, I don't want to support that, they think, I'm getting a good price and these people have jobs, so it's good for me, it's good for them. And that's just a lack of morals, to me. So these are tools and methods of neocolonialism, right? They also have multilateral treaties and things like this, agreements made with like multilateral, bilateral, unilateral means one party. Bilateral is two parties. Multilateral means three or more parties, right? They have these treaties and these agreements where, like, say, China will say, this American company can have an office here, and then they also have a part where it includes maybe the UK. I'm just drawing a reference. This might not be 100% accurate, but there's three parties involved. It's beneficial to the capitalists. All of these people are capitalists, right? Usually it's the people on the lower level that are getting exploited. And amongst the three countries, the one who is the least developed is going to be exploited the most. And the ones who are the most developed are going to benefit the most. All right. So that's a tool to keep poor countries poor, rich countries keep getting richer. Poor countries are always there, and their people are always, available to be, mistreated and be happy about it. Right. This is all done indirectly. Like I said before, you can't see who's pulling the strings, but the strings are being pulled. People don't know who to be mad at, who to protest against, because they can't see the person or persons in directly. And that's all intentional. So you don't know who to protest against, who to have an uprising against. You're just mad, and generally people take it out on the people around them, not knowing that it's somebody all the way in another country that's pulling the strings, creating your situation. Another thing that the neocolonialists do is that they empower a few individuals to be able to become wealthy, whether it be in a community, in a country, whatever the case may be. When I say few, in a country like China, you have more billionaires and multimillionaires coming up, but China has billions of people. So while it may be, they might have, like, say, 50,000 new billionaires or millionaires, the rest of the billions of people is more than 1 billion. It's like several billion people live in China are in poverty, or, there's a middle class and all of that stuff, just like America has a middle class, but the middle class range is from almost poor to pretty wealthy, for a regular person like myself. These people have more than one house, they got several cars, they have a business, they have stocks, they have, investments, etc. They're not, if they, like, say, quit their job today, they're still going to be all right because they have assets, but they're still called middle class. But then you have wealthy people, really extremely wealthy people like Bezos and, the Bill Gates, and there's others, Warren Buffett, right? So the capitalist nations, the more developed nations, allow for some people in the country to get rich or wealthy, so that it's not like, you can't just say, like, Black people in America can't say, quote unquote, cannot say that Black people are oppressed, because you have LeBron James, who's rich, Michael Jordan is rich. There's Black doctors, Black lawyers. Black people can get an education, and they can, choose to have a better lifestyle if they want to. But so that's there for the masses, so that they can't say that it's based on skin color. But we all know that, in Black communities throughout America, you have crime. Some of the things is Black people do it to each other, but then you have to look beyond that and say there's predatory lending. There's things where, like, say, redlining and other methods that they use to keep communities poor, to keep people from coming out of communities. The prison systems are full of Black people. All of this, it's a whole intricate system of keeping, a certain control over how many can make it out, essentially. And so that happens in all of these countries. In any third world country, you have some rich people. right? And all of the countries that are developing, you have rich people, but you also have abject poverty. You know, people who don't have running water. They're where they live, you know, is like barely put together, shacks and shanties, etc., things like this, that you will see in what they call third world countries. Um, so yeah, they do these things indirectly, covertly, but we know, I mean, if you study it, you realize that when you get behind the scenes and you see who's who, you can tell it's still the same colonial powers that's pulling the strings. And that's the point of this explanation, is to get you to see that the colonial powers of yesterday are still in control of their colonies and of the masses of the people around the world. Um, pardon me. The IMF and the World Bank, they make loans, and they have other forms of aid that they give to these underdeveloped countries, intentionally underdeveloped by the same people that are exploiting them. They could have developed them because they know these countries have the resources to develop. Most of the diamonds are found in Africa, a lot of gold, uranium, coltan, lots of different mineral resources. You got plenty of people who have strength, and they're intelligent people that just don't have the right opportunities. So they underdevelop these countries, then they give them, say, a loan to quote unquote help them to get into a better situation. But with that loan, generally it comes from a high, incredible interest rate. And most times these countries are never, ever going to be able to pay these loans back because it's set that way. So if I loan you money and you can't pay me back with cash, and all you have is labor, and not to say like the government is going to be laboring, but their government is going to pretty much sell out their people to be laborers for this country or this company, whatever the case may be, the IMF, the World Bank, to kind of try and make up for the debt that they have incurred because of their position, which is not much options, right? So that's intentional. IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, they do these things. Like if you can look up the documentary Life in Debt, which is about, it mostly is Jamaica. It mentions Haiti in there, but third world countries, black countries that are being exploited by neocolonialists. It really gives you a good overview of how they function economically. It's more to it than economics, though, which we'll unravel it over time. But at the end of the day, it's still the same Europeans who gain control of the world through colonialism and imperialism, who are still using covert methods to control the people of the world, the finances of the world, the way where people can move, their freedom, etc. Everything about it is intricate, and it's hard to pinpoint how and who. But if you really look into it, which we will, you can really see. And I think this is important for Black people because oftentimes, like I said, we get mad at other Black people, Black governments and our neighbors and things, and think they're the reason and the cause of our problems. And if you watch what white people say about us, they say, well, you say that white people are oppressing you, but you kill each other more than anybody else kills you. Y'all abort your own children. Your crime and jail, the prisons are full of Black people. It's like basically they're saying we make bad choices, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in. And if you listen to them long enough, you'll start believing the lies that they're telling you about yourself, and accepting that false reality. When really they give you very little option of how to earn your keep. And generally, the people around you are the ones that, if you're going to be a criminal, you're going to be stealing from somebody probably that's not too far from you. There's some, like crime and people killing each other over shoes and necklaces and stuff like that is all a result, of the trickle down effect of neocolonialism. So, that's a basic introduction to the topic of neocolonialism. If you have any, thing to add to it, comment in the, comment section, and we check the comments and we reply, and your feedback is valuable to us. And like I said, over the next few days, maybe weeks, we'll be going into other aspects. The first aspect that we're going to talk about is economics. But yeah, we'll do all 9 areas of human activity, as how neocolonialism affects us as a people. Yeah. So give thanks for your attention. Give thanks for tuning in. We hope that this information is helping you in some way, shape, or form to understand how the world is working right now and your place in it. Because education is power, and that's why Frederick Douglass said, education makes a man unfit to be a slave. So through the African Liberation Network, we hope to help each other to be more educated on our situation so that we can be less fit to be their slaves and their puppets and their readily exploitable resources. Yeah. His Imperial Majesty formed the OAU to counter neocolonialism. It was in in the 60s or 70s. I don't know the exact date. And it really, for the sake of this conversation, it doesn't matter. His Majesty formed the OAU because he could see what had happened. He knew that some countries still were, struggling for their independence, but he knew that through unity and sacrifice and a common goal, which is, freedom for African people, liberation, that we can achieve it. We can achieve what any other set of people can achieve, as Marcus Garvey told us, but it takes sacrifice. It takes focus. It takes education. It takes, expanding our capacities as people, we have to be broad in our scope, and of course, we have to consider the future. We have to have foresight. But right now we have to have insight into how things are working, so we can navigate through it in the most constructive way, to dismantle the system of white supremacy and neocolonialism, and to claim our rightful position in Earth. Africa is the wealthiest continent, and they all know that. We know it now, but it's kind of too late. Not to say too late. We know it, and we have to do what we have to do to be able to utilize our own wealth for ourselves. They're benefiting off our wealth more than we are, and that's a problem. So the OAU transition into being the AU. The AU now exists. They still have a lot of room to grow, to be able to meet the needs of African people. The 6th region of the African Union, which is the diaspora, us Black people outside of Africa, we need to work together with the AU, to be able to secure our own freedom and to be able to control our destiny as Black people. Yeah, so, give thanks again for tuning in. Like I said, comment. If you haven't subscribed already, subscribe. So when we live stream, when we release new videos, to further the conversation, you will be getting it, get a notification if you turn on the notification bell. But yeah, tune in in the future, and we'll go further into the topic, because there's a lot more to cover, a lot more intricacy to unravel, to decode, Yeah, so blessed love, my Lord and Empress, family near and far. Yeah, give thanks again for tuning in. This is the African Liberation Network. I am Prophet Daniel. And until next time, all strength and all powers. Jah Rastafari. Blessed.